The Foreign Desk, as we are fond of reminding people, is not really one show, but two. As well as the interview-based half-hour show which airs every Saturday, we broadcast midweek a shorter companion called the Foreign Desk Explainer. This, as the name very strongly suggests, seeks to illuminate the backstory and context of the kind of headline that we think listeners may have glimpsed, then found themselves vaguely wondering what that might be all about. The topics that the Foreign Desk Explainer sought to explain in 2025 includes, but is by no means limited to, the reasons that Islamic State may want to set up shop in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the curious history of the Balochistan Liberation Army, the territorial dispute that divides South Africa and Lesotho, Australia's enthusiasm for a defence treaty with Papua New Guinea, Russia's recognition of the Taliban, US President Donald Trump's real motivations for threatening legal action against the national broadcaster of a foreign ally, and what, so far as anyone knows, goes on in a papal conclave. What follows is a selection of 2025's Foreign Desk Explainers, attempting to demonstrate something of their breadth of geography, subject and tone. There are some stories which it is safe to take less seriously than others. Time-served listeners will by now appreciate the inverse relationship between gravity of topic and quota of sound effects. Why would Qatar want to give Donald Trump an aeroplane? Who keeps cutting Taiwan's undersea cables? And how hard can it be to bury a Zambian president? This is the Foreign Desk Explainer.
I could be a stupid person to say, oh no, we don't want a free plane.
My jacket is immaculate. They can try as much as they want. They won't be able to tarnish me.
I wish to make a solemn call for peace, a call for love.
You're listening to The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller. First, Qatar's answer to the question of what to give the man who has everything, aside arguably from his marbles.
I could be a stupid person to say, oh no, we don't want a free plane.
The U.S. and Qatar are working out the final details of a gift, a big gift.
This is just the latest reflection of an egregious, corrupt presidency.
As of this recording, the status of the gift Qatar has been reportedly poised to present to US President Donald Trump. A custom-tricked Boeing 747-8 worth somewhere in the vicinity of $400 million is unclear. Qatar, perhaps taking note of the response to what would be corruption flagrant and remarkable even by President Trump's formidable standards, is hedging somewhat, saying the stories are inaccurate and the matter is under review and no decision has been made. All of which, alert listeners will note, fall some way short of course this isn't happening, are you insane, it would be outrageous. Because, to be clear, and before we move along to what we promise will be a learned and expansive disquisition on the wider subject of Qatari foreign policy, outrageous is exactly what it would be. It is not even just the obvious and basic bung, i.e. here is a monstrously expensive gift and by golly yes we will be expecting you to pick up the phone whenever we call. It is an almost amusingly massive security risk given the number of nooks and or crannies on a Boeing 747 in which bugging devices might be secreted. Recall that in 2002 a Boeing 767 ordered by China's then President Jiang Zemin, fitted by various companies in Texas, was discovered to be rigged with at least 27 spying devices. The soft power optics are just awful. Steward of the world's biggest economy, commander-in-chief of the mightiest military ever wielded, travelling the planet in an airborne gin palace furnished by a Middle Eastern dictatorship with the population of Chicago and the GDP of Kentucky. Even if it is the case that replacing the aging pair of Boeing 747-200s, which currently mostly serve as Air Force One, is taking a vexingly long time, the USAF does have other planes, and besides which, modifying a new one to meet the rarefied standards of Air Force One, which is not merely a means of transport but an airborne command centre from which World War III can be directed if necessary, is likely to take longer than Trump theoretically has left in office. And not that Trump or anyone around him cares, but the whole proposal is just hilariously illegal under US law, specifically Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8 of the Constitution of the United States, the so-called Emoluments Clause. Quote, "No person holding any office of profit or trust under the United States shall, without the consent of Congress, accept of any present emolument, office or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince or foreign state." By way of perspective, and an example plucked more or less at random from among thousands, in 2013, Chief Justice Umar Sako, first President of the Supreme Court of the Republic of Senegal, presented US President Barack Obama with a handcrafted drum decorated in the green, gold and red of Senegal's flag, which Obama dutifully turned over to the National Archives lest there be any suggestion or suspicion of impropriety. It was worth about $900. For all that, the interesting question is not why would Donald Trump even consider accepting such a gift. It's a great big gold bauble, of course he wants it, but why Qatar would offer it.
I think that was a very nice gesture.
We will not at this time be considering the possibility that Qatar is doing this just because they're a generous and hospitable people. When trying to understand why countries do stuff, it's always useful to consider what that given country wants, which is usually to survive and to prosper, because who wouldn't? Where survival is concerned, Qatar has more reason to be preoccupied than most. It is a small country in a volatile region. It is not so long since Qatar fell out so spectacularly with its vast neighbour Saudi Arabia that the Saudis threatened to turn their shared border into a canal and fill it with nuclear waste.
International companies have been invited to compete for the project. If the project is carried out, it would geographically extend Qatar's isolation from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt.
And that was after the Saudis had arrayed many other Arab countries into a diplomatic and economic blockade of Qatar. Long story short, everyone was annoyed with Qatar's support for various opposition and or rebel groups across the Arab world, including, ingloriously, Hamas, whose political leader Ismail Haniyeh was long a resident of Doha, Qatar's hosting of a Turkish military base, and Qatar's insistence on funding media, including Al Jazeera, that committed actual journalism in Arab countries. It is common for small countries to pursue a commensurately modest foreign policy, basically hoping that they're safe as long as nobody notices them. You do not see Slovenia, for example, swaggering about the world stage demanding a starring role. But since the accession to the Qatari throne of Emir Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani in 1995, he's still with us, but handed over to one of his sons, Emir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, in 2013, Qatar has instead followed what might be thought of as a roaring mouse strategy. This is a learned allusion to Leonard Wibberley's 1955 novel The Mouse That Roared, later a droll film starring Peter Sellers about a tiny European duchy which accidentally becomes a superpower.
There isn't a more profitable undertaking for any country than to declare war on the United States and to be defeated.
This is why Qatar has done things like founding Al Jazeera, launching a globe-straddling airline, hosting foreign universities and foreign militaries, US Central Command is located in Qatar, and staging a World Cup. And you'll never guess which prominent American family is currently involved in a $5.5 billion venture to build a golf course near Doha. Arguably more usefully, Qatar has also positioned itself as a diplomatic mediator and deal-maker. Qatar has hosted and/or enabled talks between the US and the Taliban and between parties to various conflicts in the Middle East and Africa. Possessing Earth's largest gas field obviously helps in funding such endeavours, but those colossal resources are also a reason that Qatar is forever vulnerable, either to the predations of neighbours or to a Middle Eastern conflict which chokes the Persian Gulf and Qatar's shipping routes with it.
All of those countries, we keep them safe. If it wasn't for us, they probably wouldn't exist right now.
A powerful friend, Earth's most powerful friend, would be handy, especially if their fancy new plane's onboard microphones can pick up anything useful.
You know their slogan, yes, yes, speak louder into the tray table.
For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller. This is the Foreign Desk on Monocle Radio, and now to the recurrent twanging sound in the Taiwan Strait. If a thing happens, a thing has happened. Thing happens twice, it's a coincidence. 3 times, it's a trend. Upwards of that, certainly the stuff from which Foreign Desk explainers may be hewn. Off the northeast coast of Taiwan, an undersea cable has been damaged. There has been, as has been cunningly foreshadowed, a fair bit of this sort of thing recently, and not only in the vicinity of Taiwan, and we shall get to that presently, but first to the most recent incident, with the caveat that so frequently are undersea cables getting twanged of late that it is far from impossible that another might have gone between the recording and the broadcast of this explainer, and indeed it is not completely inconceivable that some of the Foreign Desk's vast and discerning global audience may have been deprived of even hearing this precisely because of such an occurrence. Beat that, Alanis Morissette. Listeners too young to appreciate this deft mid-90s cultural reference can ask a parent. On January 3rd, one of the fibre optic cables which links Taiwan to other countries in the region was cut by means of a ship's anchor dragging the ocean floor. No great disruption was occasioned. Taiwan, long used to living with menace and harassment, is more diligent than most countries where backup contingency planning is concerned. Changhua Telecom acted swiftly to reroute data via other cables, and none of our Taiwanese listeners, hello and Happy New Year to you, missed anything. The culpable vessel appears to have been a conspicuously rusty freighter variously listed as the Shunqing 39 or the Jingshun 39, flying the flag of either or both Cameroon and Tanzania, broadcasting its position from 2 sets of identification equipment, all of which just sounds tremendously above board, but owned by Hong Kong company Jiang Trading, whose sole director is a Chinese citizen, as are the ship's crew. It was travelling from the Taiwanese port of Keelung to Busan in South Korea when the cable was damaged. Taiwanese authorities do not appear to be spending much time contemplating the innocent accident, just one of those things hypothesis. The extremely thinly veiled assertion of Taiwanese authorities is that the cable was deliberately cut on the instructions of China. It is, on form, not an outrageous allegation. Undersea cables connected to Taiwan have been cut perhaps 30 times in the last 5 years alone. This can happen by mishap. Such cables are usually only between 20 and 30 millimeters wide, and even when protected by steel casing are no match for a ship's anchor, and the waters around Taiwan are busy, and accidents do happen. But Taiwan does not believe it is this unlucky. Which prompts the question of why China would do this, which prompts the answer of why would China not. China, in its long quest to reincorporate what it regards as the temporarily rogue province of Taiwan, has never attempted persuasion or charm, unless one counts the bizarre propaganda campaign directed at the outlying Taiwanese island of Kinmen between 1958 and 1979, when the People's Republic intermittently blitzed bewildered locals with propaganda leaflets conveyed by artillery shells. In many realms, China pursues a policy of annoying, undermining, and intimidating Taiwan, sometimes subtly, sometimes not, the intention being, apparently, to dull Taiwan's response if and when push meets shove. A campaign of snapping undersea cables is also deliciously, doubly deniable, in that you can claim it wasn't you, and if it was, you didn't do it on purpose. Which is why it has become such a popular tactic. In November last year, 2 similar cables under the Baltic Sea were severed. A Chinese-registered cargo ship, Yipeng 3, was in the vicinity at the time and manoeuvring notably weirdly. China refused Swedish prosecutors permission to board, and Yipeng 3 was last seen sailing the Suez Canal en route back home, mission apparently accomplished. On Christmas Day, cables connecting Finland and Estonia were damaged. A Cook Islands registered tanker, Eagle S, was boarded by Finnish police and escorted to Porvoo, where investigations are ongoing. Curiously, Eagle S was uninsured, and even more curiously, Eagle S was reportedly fitted with sophisticated surveillance equipment unusual for a vessel of its quotidian type. Eagle S's anchor snapped from its cable almost as if it had encountered some sort of resistance while being deliberately dragged along the seabed, has been recovered by the Swedish Navy. The consensus appears to be that Eagle S is a component of Russia's so-called Shadow Fleet, an armada of dubious vessels engaged in breaking sanctions, as well as, on occasion, the telecoms infrastructure of Russia's adversaries. NATO has now resolved to dispatch warships to loom ominously in areas where further such shenanigans might be anticipated. So far, at least, the sabotage operations have proved merely tedious, but they are a representation of what the West is up against. A foe which takes no heed of rules and norms or any responsibility for its actions is often at a natural advantage. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller. You're listening to The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller. This is a special episode of the year's best Foreign Desk explainers, and to France, which this year put one former president briefly in prison and told a potential future president she was out of the running.
My jacket is immaculate. They can try as much as they want. They won't be able to tarnish me because I have ethics and morals. And when I expect ethics and morals from others, I expect it of myself.
If there is one concern which unites the hyper-right populist parties of the Western world, other than the innate depravities of foreigners coming over here, taking our jobs, hosting our current affairs podcasts, etc., it is law and order. Law and order, the bellicose conservative solemnly intones, that's what we're all about. Law and order, they thunderously declaim, we can't get enough of it. Order and law, if you'd prefer them that way round, whatever, vote for us, and that's what we'll serve up, and in prodigious quantities. Law and order, can we have a sound effect of people banging their clipboards vigorously on their desks in an exultant demonstration of feverish zeal? Law and order. Except, it turns out that this rule, or law, or order, is not always, as these people see it, applicable. Earlier this week, Marine Le Pen, leader of the French far-right party National Rally and bookmakers' favourite for the 2027 French presidential election, was convicted, along with several associates, of fiddling EU funds, circa €4 million worth. Among the more picturesque offences, allotting fake EU Parliament jobs to National Rally members as a means of siphoning public money for party purposes. Le Pen was fined €100,000, sentenced to 4 years in the clink, though 2 were suspended and the other 2 can be served via electronic tag, and probably most vexingly from her perspective, banned from seeking public office for 5 years, which obviously benches her for 2027.
It's of course because we are about to win the election.
Le Pen denies everything and plans to appeal.
Prime Minister and leader of the far-right League Party, Matteo Salvini, calling it a declaration of war on the part of Brussels.
Viktor Orban saying, "Je suis marine, I am marine."
Geert Wilders, head of the Dutch Freedom Party, tweeted, "I support and believe in her for the full 100%, and I trust she will win the appeal and become President of France."
Hastening to her defence are some of the Western world's noisiest advocates of law and indeed order. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Dutch Freedom Party leader Geert Wilders, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, Vox leader Santiago Abascal of Spain, and US President Elon Musk, yes, we did that deliberately by way of satirical mischief, have all pledged their solidarity and or unwavering belief in Le Pen's innocence. All, interestingly, have thus far been conspicuously silent about the legal travails of former centre-right French President Nicolas Sarkozy, already convicted of corruption and currently facing the prospect of 7 years of prison bouillabaisse if convicted of trousering bungs from unlamented Libyan despot Muammar Gaddafi. It is almost as if these people are not so much advocates for the rigorous and impartial application of law and order as they are bad faith partisans and bun hurlers intent on waging some sort of inane culture war. Also standing alongside Le Pen in this, her hour of need, was Russia, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov sternly inveighing against what he called a violation of democratic norms, which does, can we all agree, sound just awful, and certainly completely unlike anything which would ever happen in Russia. Here is what should not be a controversial suggestion, that if you, a citizen of a reasonably functional democracy, are convicted by a court of law of a serious crime, say a crime serious enough to warrant a €100,000 fine and 4 years in the hoosegow, if the state also disbars you from seeking public office, it is merely observing the basic tenets of civic hygiene, i.e. preventing the crooked and malicious from exercising power. Put more simply, if you want to be president, don't steal stuff. Among those, incidentally, who have been commendably clear on this point is Marine Le Pen.
I have heard the president say we should instate lifelong ineligibility, and I was completely in agreement, since it's in my presidential project, but just for those convicted of corruption and fiscal fraud. But what about the rest? What about favoritism and misappropriation of public funds, or fictitious jobs?
At least that's what she thought in 2013. But times change. The question which thus arises, and which will shortly be answered in tones of weary derision, is why the ardent law and order enthusiasts of the populist right are positively stampeding to line up behind a felon. It may seem illogical, but it isn't. The sentiment which principally animates modern populism is self-pity. It is a creed which has been embraced across the democratic West by the fortunate citizens of free, prosperous and orderly nations who find it more exciting to believe themselves the brutally subjugated subjects of an elitist establishment, and are therefore eager to believe any charlatan willing to encourage such notions. When one of their sentinels ends up in the dock, and Le Pen is not the first to have demonstrated the overlap between populist tub thumper and grifting crook, it merely reinforces this delirium. While this is obviously potentially dangerous, it has been nevertheless depressing this week to read some allegedly sensible commentators wringing their hands at Le Pen's conviction, fretting that it may have rendered her more powerful. Just as, for example, US President Donald Trump seemed able to leverage to electoral advantage his conviction for cooking the books to pay for the silence of the star of Trailer Trash Nurses 6.
And it's a shame. It's a shame what's happening to our country. This is election interference.
So it is entirely possible that the populist right will see Le Pen's conviction as a positive boon, further evidence for their proposition that they, the authentic voice of the people, are being suppressed by a deep state of conniving career politicians and complicit judges. It is not even impossible that this week's apparent setback will ultimately work to Le Pen's benefit. Maybe a sufficient plurality of French voters will buy her line that, really, when you think about it, she's basically a cross between Alfred Dreyfus and Nelson Mandela. Maybe her conviction will prove crucial in getting her likely stand-in, Jordan Bardella, over the line in 2027. Or maybe it won't. Whether Marine herself or her ghastly father, the late and unlamented Jean-Marie, there has been a Le Pen on every French presidential ballot since 1981, and they haven't won it yet. As this endurance demonstrates, it is not easy to conclusively defeat people who can spin every loss as a victory, every disgrace as an affirmation. But if justice makes allowances on such grounds, what are we even doing? For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller. This is The Foreign Desk on Monocle Radio with me, Andrew Muller, our selection of some of the year's best Foreign Desk explainers, and finally to Zambia, which couldn't agree where, when or how to bury its former president, and as of this recording, still hasn't. The protocols attending the sending off of a former head of state are, in general, well understood. The state of which the deceased was head puts on a proper wingding, flag-draped coffin, mournful music from marching band and/or choir, salutary cannonade from national military, maybe a fly-past, if budget permits. A broad array of local politicians turn out, affecting dignified grief while calculating their chances of advancement, especially if the departed has died in office and bumped everyone up a notch, and or silently rejoicing at the demise of a rival. Speeches will be made celebrating the character and accomplishments, such as they may have been, of the embalmee, while skating delicately around any secret children, offshore bank accounts or misadventures in real estate. The keynote will generally be delivered by the incumbent leader, nobly setting aside whatever partisan rancour may have roiled in this world to grieve on behalf of a bereaved nation. A hefty legion of current and former foreign presidents and prime ministers will pitch up, glad of the free holiday and or networking opportunity. And if you're interested in the diplomatic subtexts of such an event, and what kind of weirdo would not be, we did a whole thing on this in Foreign Desk episode 455, attached to the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. Seriously, one of our best ever. It has an interview with an actual honest-to-goodness king in it. Lesotho, since you ask, which counts? Yes, it does. All of which preamble is by way of noting that Zambia has somehow contrived to make what should be the relatively straightforward process of interring a former leader into a bit of an episode of The Jerry Springer Show. Though, in fairness, the protagonists have, at least as of this broadcast, etc., stopped short of hurling studio chairs at each other in front of an audience of mooing yokels.
Let me hear it, ding, ding.
The plain facts of the matter are these. On June 5th, Edgar Lungu, Zambia's 6th president since independence, serving from 2015 to 2021, died in South Africa, aged 68, apparently due to complications arising from recent cardiac surgery.
Fellow Zambians, it is with profound sorrow that we announce the passing of His Excellency, Dr. Edgar Chagwa Lungu.
His legacy is, as presidential legacies usually are, a mixed one. Lungu did pretty well on infrastructure, roads in particular, less sensationally on shepherding Zambia's economy through COVID-19, pretty dismally on protecting democratic rights, freedom of expression and so forth. However, the reason that Lungu's outgoing has become the subject of a frankly unseemly row is not political, but personal. It seems that among his dying wishes was one to the effect that Zambia's current president, Hakainde Hichilema, should not be invited to his funeral. So there. Rival books of condolence were opened, one by Zambia's government, one by Lungu's party, the Patriotic Front. Different dates for official mourning periods were issued. Grudge-bearing is one of those traits that divides humanity. There are those who cannot be bothered to seethe and rage, still less actively connive against those who they feel have slighted or wronged them, and those who can. It is possible that the latter class of person is disproportionately attracted and suited to a life in politics. To maintain such grievance into the grave, however, that is a rarefied strain of pique, demanding that we consider the reasons for it. Presidents Lungu and Hichilema were the opposing candidates in 3 consecutive Zambian presidential elections. In the first, in 2015, held early to determine who would finish the term of President Michael Sata, who died in office, Lungu, who had been Sata's defence minister, won narrowly. In the second, in 2016, which returned Zambia's presidential elections to their usual schedule, Lungu won again, slightly less narrowly. In the third, in 2021, Hichilema won by a street. It was his 6th bid for the presidency overall. But while some political rivals maintain perfectly civil personal relationships, Lungu and Hichilema did not.
Fundamentally, we are saying Lusaka should not be declared because there's a lot of scams that went in Lusaka.
Following the 2016 election, Hichilema refused to recognise the result. Lungu had Hichilema arrested after Hichilema's motorcade refused to give way to Lungu's, as both were en route to the same function. It was, at worst, a traffic offence. Hichilema was charged with treason, potentially a capital crime. The charges were dropped after considerable international pressure, especially from a baffled Commonwealth, which hinted heavily that Zambia's membership hung in the balance. Late last year, Zambia's Constitutional Court ruled that Lungu could not run for president again in 2026. His brief first term was assessed as a full one, and Zambian presidents can only do 2. Lungu decried this as political manipulation and may have had a case. Hichilema had sacked 3 judges who had previously ruled in Lungu's favour. There was yards more of this. Even now, Lungu's family believe that he might still be with us, had he not been for many years banned from leaving Zambia and had therefore been able to seek medical treatment elsewhere sooner. Zambia's government denies that any such restriction was ever imposed. But, as of this recording and so forth, grudging agreement appears maybe to have been reached after several days of negotiations between Lungu's family and Zambian emissaries.
The family of the former president wishes to announce that it has reached agreement with representatives of the government on the repatriation of the remains of the late former president, as well as his funeral and burial program.
Lungu will be returned to Lusaka for a few days lying in state before a state funeral, possibly on Sunday, at which President Hichilema will speak. Possibly ominously, a Lungu family spokesperson underscored that this would all go ahead only as long as Zambia's government did not, quote, deviate from our agreement. Possibly even more ominously, another bulletin issued since urges all Zambians to ignore the programs already in circulation in anticipation of an updated schedule. And possibly even more ominously than that, just as this explainer was being rewritten for like the dozenth time, kind of past caring at this point if we're honest, it was reported that Lungu's family were on the verge of yanking the plug on the whole thing because they did not feel that their wishes were being, after all, respected.
The family finds it very difficult to believe that the government will stick to their end of the agreement and have resolved, sadly so, that the mortal remains of President Edgar Chagwa Lungu will not return home today.
President Hichilema has been at pains to say all the proper things, calling for peace, compassion and unity.
I wish to make a solemn call, a call for peace, a call for love, a call for unity.
He may be entirely sincere about this. He may also fear their opposites. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller. That's it for this episode of The Foreign Desk. We'll be back next week, and look out for The Foreign Desk Explainer, available every Wednesday. The Foreign Desk was produced by Anita Riota and Lily Austin. Lily also produces The Foreign Desk Explainer. To contact the Foreign Desk team, you can email Anita at aer@monocle.com, and don't forget to subscribe to Monocle Magazine and to our free daily email bulletins by heading to our website at monocle.com. From me, Andrew Muller, thank you very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.